It's Le Mans weekend! Best and most prestigious endurance race in the world. Sorry, Nürburgring fans, but it will have its 100th anniversary this year. Although it's not the 100th running of the race. Cancelled for 5 years because of World War II, and the race was also cancelled in 1936 due to worker strikes. France and striking, name a better combo. Over the 100 years that this race has been running, the race has seen legends born both in the driver sense and the car sense. On the driver's side, you've got Tom Christensen, Mr. Le Mans himself, with 9 victories, Jackie Ickx with 6, and other names including Derek Bell, Henri Pescarolo, Ken Miles, Alan McNish, Andre Lotterer, and Graham Hill, who completed the Triple Crown at Le Mans in 1972. And then there's the cars. The Ford GT, the Porsche 917, a green and orange Mazda, Ferrari 250 LM, and the Jaguar D-Type. I mean, the list goes on. From British and Italian sports cars to cars purposely designed to destroy the competition out of personal spite, to the heyday of Group C and into the era of Le Mans' second most popular era, LMP1. Now with Group C, I've talked about those Mulsanne monsters a few times on the channel, cars that were basically massive turbochargers on wheels, and the driver was just there to make sure it pointed in the right direction. It's a subject where it seems there's always something new to talk about every year, and outside of the F1 stuff, I do quite like the Group C stories, simply because those cars were the perfect embodiment of the 1980s. Just insane. 240 miles an hour down the Mulsanne. Because they could. And yes, before the anoraks get involved, I'm well aware the straight is called the Hunedier and only the corner is called Mulsanne, but it's A, an easier name to say, and B, everybody calls it that. Even Martin Haven. And if Martin Haven says it, then I'm saying it. He also said that heroin was a good alternative to cake at 3 in the morning. Martin Haven is a legend. But all that said, it's basically endurance racing's version of "That's Radeon, actually." Anyway, as documented in a video last year, Group C died because the FIA, with a little bit of nudging from Messrs Eccleston and Mosley, decided that F1 and sports cars could have themselves some overlap, standardise the engine in both series, and if F1 teams wanted to go to Le Mans and vice versa, they could. It seemed like a good idea on paper to keep both series healthy because endurance racing was at its most popular, but the manufacturers quickly realised that it was cheaper to do 16 rounds of an F1 season than it was to do 6 rounds of an endurance series, because an F1 engine isn't designed for 24 hours of straight running. It's designed for an hour and a half or so. Well, I mean, back then it was, anyway. So in probably the most gut-wrenching way, Group C died with a whimper in 1992, and with Max Mosley now on the verge of entering the head office at the FIA, the scramble began to find a replacement for this beloved category. Group C cars would have their time still at Le Mans in 1992, otherwise there would have been nobody on the grid, and in 1994 there was the dour big brain moment that I've already talked about on the channel. The cars introduced around 1994 were called Le Mans prototypes and split into 2 categories, LMP1 and LMP2. But they're not the same LMP1 and LMP2 that used to do run today. LMP1 at this time was large displacement, purpose-built engines. LMP2s were production-based engines, and both categories were open cockpit. So imagine a Radical on steroids, basically. And these lasted until 1996. In Europe, these top classes were LMP1. In America, in IMSA, they became known as WSC. It's similar to how GT3 in Europe and GTD over in the States is sort of named. There's probably slight differences under the bonnet, but I couldn't find the data. But in 1995, the ACO got rid of the LMP1 category as it originally was, and based new WSC regulations based off IMSA, and in return, IMSA allowed turbo-powered cars into the series. A WSC car actually finished second in class, with one of the drivers on board being Mario Andretti, but it was still a lap down on the winning McLaren that was in GT1. I mean, it is a bit confusing around this time because you got prototypes as fast as GTs or faster, then you got GT1, GT2. Yeah, it's going to be too long explaining all of that, so moving on. Then in 2000, things changed again. LMP1 and LMP2 were renamed. LMP1 was split into LMP900 and LMP675, with the numbers being the minimum weight in kilos, with the theory being that both categories could take an overall win. The LMP900s would be faster in the straights and the 675s would be faster in the corners, so there was kind of a hope that they would balance each other out. All the big manufacturers went into 900, while MG went into the smaller one. LMP2 became known as LMGTP, or Le Mans Grand Tourer prototype, which is basically anything too fast for the GT category. But again, this didn't last particularly long. The FIA had its own version of these categories called SR1 and SR2, but the overlap between them was virtually non-existent. After the death of the IMSA GT series in 1999, the series became the American Le Mans series, and in Europe, the European Le Mans series was created. The FIA had the FIA Sports Car Championship, but the problem was the amount of changes the teams had to make to their cars to run in the Sports Car Championship were too much work. And because the teams wanted to race at Le Mans, because that's the pinnacle for endurance racing, much like the Indy 500 is for American open wheel racing, and you've got that kind of split thing happening between kart and IndyCar, they were more inclined to play by the ACO's rulebook than they were the FIA's. So the 2003 season was cancelled. When it became blatantly obvious that the 675 series was not capable of competing for the overall win, and the LMGTP cars were not too far off those 675 cars, the 675 class was dumped, and LMGTP was given the LMP2 moniker once more, with the 900 being rebranded LMP1 for the 2004 season. This then allowed for the rebranded LMP2s to be open or closed cockpit again, and now they were intended for privateer entries, so that the manufacturers would spend all their money in LMP1 and make it sort of like how Hypercar is today or Group C was back in the 80s. When LMP1 became what it is again in 2004, Audi was the only big manufacturer involved. Lola had built a car, as had Lister, Reynard is on the list too, but nothing like it would become, I guess, but we'll get to that in a bit. In 2007, Peugeot joined the grid, and this is also around the time Audi brought the V12 diesel-powered R10, a car that was BOP'd so many times it still managed to win. Now, Audi had been dominating Le Mans since 2000 with the R8, with its winning streak only dented by the Bentley Speed 8 in 2003. And having a diesel engine became part of the appeal. It was different. It was more about the endurance aspect of endurance racing, if that makes any sense, because it was about fuel economy rather than just raw pace. And actually, Audi wasn't the first team to have a diesel engine at Le Mans, because in 1949 it got tried in an engine built by Delange. It meant that the Audis had insane fuel reliability and would end up spending less time stopped in the pits and could be on track longer, while the rivals had to stop. They may or may not have exploited some loopholes, but the whole technical specs for the car and its history are probably something for another video. I mean, I've already done the Porsche to death, so why not? There we go, that's Monday sorted. 2010, the ACO released its updated rulebook saying that for the 2011 version of Le Mans, that the teams could run a hybrid powertrain if they so wished, but these hybrid powertrains could only be used to improve fuel consumption and not performance. A couple of years later, they had to start reducing the engine sizes because Peugeot and Audi were smashing through any performance limits faster than the ACO could set them. Audi had gone from a V10 down to a V6, Peugeot had run a V12 diesel for their win in 2009 but had shrunk it to a V8 by the time they left after the end of 2011. It would be only the second time since 2000 that an Audi had not won in France. In 2014, regulation changes were made again. The cars would have certain changes made to them and given narrower tyres to try and slow them down and also address visibility issues that the cars caused. Any manufacturer that wanted into LMP1 had to run a hybrid, while customers could still run a naturally aspirated engine, such as Rebellion Racing. The dimensions are on your screen, but in 2014 Toyota would take the pole with a 321.789, a second faster than the previous year. Although, that said, a change had been made to Tetra Rouge in the wake of Alan Simonson's accident. At their peak, these cars had more than enough downforce to be the fastest closed-top cars in history, chucking out 900 horsepower while having traction control to keep the rear in check. Budgets were nudging 200 million, which, like the end of Group C, might have made Formula 1 a more cost-effective option, without any meddling at the sort of business end, if you will. They had kinetic energy recovery systems on all four wheels, and around Spa in 2017, the pole position setting Porsche was just 10 seconds slower than its Formula 1 counterpart. And it was in this time period that LMP1 kind of entered its golden age in terms of the manufacturers on the grid, although compared to Hypercar it wasn't exactly stacked. Porsche was back, and because of this attendances at Le Mans were the highest they'd been in years. But despite this, there were only 3 manufacturers on the grid in Porsche, Audi and Toyota. And I guess Nissan in 2015 with the failed Longboy project. Under the 2004 to 2020 LMP1 rules, Audi won Le Mans 10 times. Porsche won it 3 times, Toyota 3 times, and Peugeot wants. And that's the bit that shocked me most about putting this video together. You see all these things about how Audi won so many times at Le Mans, and then you look at the results and it's like, well, it was just Audi. I mean, Aston Martin did a one-off back in the day, and there are a couple of one-off entries here and there, but really, it was Audi. They were the only long-term manufacturer in the category. So while we make it out that this LMP1 category was so good and it lasted so long and there's all this other stuff, it was actually quite underwhelming in terms of competition. Like other categories before, LMP1 just became too expensive. Porsche and Audi left for Formula E to try and save face after the Dieselgate scandal involving parent company Volkswagen, leaving just Toyota in the LMP1 hybrid category, and then a load of privateer entries in the non-hybrid category. Privateer entries that couldn't compete for the overall win unless a freak occurrence of both of the Toyotas not finishing or having issues that meant they couldn't catch back up. There was an equivalence of technology rule in place that actually prevented those cars from being faster. So as it was, in 2020, LMP1 died, much like Group C did, with a whimper. While Group C was killed off due to an ill-advised business decision or power grab, you decide, the withdrawal of Porsche and Audi leaving no other manufacturer willing to buy in, as well as the pandemic, helped see off LMP1. It's now been replaced with the Hypercar class that's seen more big manufacturer interest in its third season than LMP1 did in 15 years. The glory days of Group C then might be back in a new modern form. Let's just see how it pans out and see who will win Le Mans in its 100th year. So then a look at the history of the 200-mile-an-hour spaceships that were LMP1. If this has been new to you, then do like the video so that the algorithm gets fed. I mean, I'm not sure what's happening with views at the minute, but oh well. And subscribe with the Derek bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks as ever to the kind folk over at Patreon for the continued support. If you want to help out with things around here, then links are in the description to Patreon and everything else. Well, the super thanks if you just want to do a one-off tip. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.